Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of How Honesty About Anxiety. So, the reason why I created Honesty About Anxiety is because a lot of people don't even think about happiness because they're so involved about other things that bothering everyday things that bothering their life, like anxiety, and there's no happiness thoughts in their mind. So first we have to go through anxiety. That's why I created this 9 episodes. And then you can move forward to the happiness section. Okay. And for today's episode, I have invited Benjamin. Hi, Benjamin.
Hi, Pirette. So great to be here and excited to be part of your first few guests as you launch this project. Congratulations. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'm very excited about all your experiences. You have a lot of things to talk about. So let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Sure. My name is Benjamin KINTISH, but now we know each other. You can call me Ben. Born in
Mhm.
New York City, raised in the beautiful Hudson River Valley just north of New York
Oh,
City
wow.
in a little town called Nyack, home to Edward Hopper and the late, great Helen Hayes and a whole mess of New York City-based musicians and actors who want to settle outside of New York City. A lot of them land in Nyack. So it's a great little town full of artists and interesting people.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing.
for me, it was just the place I grew up, but as I've visited it over the years as an adult, I've come to appreciate it more. Um, I grew up in a small nuclear family to two parents. They're still alive. And my big brother, 3 years older than me, happens to live in DC, so I'm able to see him pretty regularly. I'll say, as far as what got me here, I grew up loving music and performing.
Mm-hmm.
My instrument was always my voice. I was a singer from a young age. And later in my teen years, I'm pointing the wrong way. There we go, the guitar. I learned a little bit about playing guitar, and now I use that as a teaching instrument, as a music teacher. And I've also trained and worked as a cantor, which is a Jewish music minister.
Mm-hmm.
And in that world, I use guitar to lead worship and song. Um, and then the sort of career I'll be highlighting today that I don't currently do, though I play it on stage, is chaplaincy. A chaplain is a music minister. I'm sorry, a chaplain is a person of faith who helps people in distress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I trained in that capacity while I was working as a cantor, and when I created this musical, I ended up making a hero who is a chaplain. So I've had a bunch of different jobs. I call it kind of a
Yeah.
zigzag career, but the theme, I guess, would be music and education and helping others.
Mm-hmm. I actually had to Google after I found you. I had to Google what is cantor
Okay.
to understand what it actually is. So that was interesting for me.
Yeah. So the English word cantor is related to the Latin stem cantar, or like if you know Spanish cantar or Italian cantare. Um, so it is one who sings. In Hebrew, it's chazan, different
Oh,
word
okay.
altogether. So some synagogues in America, you might hear the people call the cantor the chazan.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes from the Ashkenazic or Eastern European version of Hebrew, um, chazan, as opposed to chazan. But the word in English is cantor, and I like to explain it as music minister in a Jewish synagogue. There are cantors, I believe, in the Catholic Church. So those of you Catholics watching, you might have said like, "Oh, that's the cantor."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and depending on the community, you might only have men in that role. In some communities, it is they have now accepted women in the role of cantor, which is kind of a big deal in the Catholic Church, given that women are not permitted to be priests in that version of Christianity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think in most of the Protestant faiths, you guys can correct me in the comments, but as far as I know, um, in most Protestant faiths, they call a similar position the music minister. So, but it's a similar idea in that it's someone who uses music as a tool to communicate um, the word
Mm-hmm.
prayer, biblical wisdom or stories, and then also to
Mm-hmm.
kind of build community. So that's
Yeah,
what a
it's
cantor
really
is.
interesting. For me, it's always interesting how music has always been like, at least, thousands of years, it's been part of communication. Probably
Absolutely.
more than thousands, like which we maybe don't know, but like thousands of years, people have used music as communication.
To
Like,
be sure. And, um, when I think about the music that I brought to my bedside visits, when I was a chaplain, I would keep a guitar, sometimes the one behind me, in a
okay.
backpack, like a gig bag, the kind you see
Mm-hmm.
musicians walking around with. And it would begin with knock, knock, would you like a visit? And then I'd set the bag down to the side, have this conversation. And if they were interested in hearing some music, I might reach for the guitar and play some songs. I would carry a small, famous songbook called Rise Up Singing. It has like 1,000 or so songs in one tiny volume, just the words and chords. So
Mm-hmm.
I could say, what do you feel like? Would you like something silly? Would you like, if I saw a what do you call it? Like a veteran with a lot of flags, I might
Yeah.
say, want to hear some patriotic songs? And I could like flip to the patriotism section.
Uh-huh.
Um, and, but honestly, the repertoire I went to the most, Peter, might um, redirect us to this anti-anxiety theme, which is sort of what I call the groovy folk / lullaby repertoire. So when you
That's
think about being in
interesting.
a hospice, not everyone literally wants to sleep all the time. But I think one of the overarching goals, let's name it, is a peaceful transition to the next world, or clinically speaking, a
Mm-hmm.
comfortable death and dying process.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could provide music that would kind of dial down the anxiety in the room, that could be a real help. And I know I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I can speak anecdotally that while there were occasionally moments in hospice for lively celebrations, or if someone was very healthy despite being hospice, we'll get back to that, they might go for funny or lively music, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most people who are more typical hospice patients, they were pretty far along their way towards the end of their life. That's how you end up in a residential hospice, right? So soothing music may really be just what the doctor ordered.
Okay. And it's amazing how music just brings out feelings. So many feelings. Like, I was interested to say, like you were just saying, that music can be calming for anxiety. So let's move to anxiety now as well. And
I'm
like
ready.
yes. So let's start maybe from your personal experiences with anxiety.
Sure. I mean, I think I grew up in a home that was um, where anxiety was probably common among the generations, as in
Oh, okay.
anxiety received from the parents, and that I kind of grew up living with and internalizing. I remember a theme that I kind of only identified in my first round of intensive therapy in my 20s, right, was what we came to call catastrophizing.
Oh,
So there
yeah.
were phrases as a child, and it sounds like out of a sitcom, but it's not. Like, Benjamin, this is a disaster. Or, oh my goodness, Benjamin, this is a catastrophe. And it's like, we're not talking about an actual disaster, right? In the age of hurricanes
Yes.
and wildfires. And we weren't talking about Benjamin um, actually risking life or limb, or actually, like, maybe save those words for real almost catastrophes, right? So the verb that we sort of played with was to catastrophize, was to take
Mhm.
any regular event and then turn the dial of anxiety up to 11,
Mhm.
to kind of just go to that fear place of, oh my God, what's going to happen? What could happen? What might go wrong? And so forth. As opposed to something that I try to embody as an adult, like, let's see what happens, or
Mm-hmm.
why not, or it might go well.
Yeah, exactly.
We
There
might
might
stumble
be,
along the way, but that's like the adventure.
yeah, there might
Um,
be just like daily events that everybody else will take it as a daily something that happens, like you were saying. They turned into catastrophes of things. The way I understand what you're saying, something that can be just like regular thing that might just happen to everybody any day, and they bring it over like saying it's a catastrophe now, like
yeah,
something really big.
I'm aware as I'm sharing this that I'm trying not to overshare. I'm choosing not to give their first names. But I think it's also worth mentioning. I'm a proud Jewish American. My parents are both Jewish. We descend from Jewish families who came over during the height of Jewish immigration between 1880 and 1915, right?
Okay.
That predates World War II, when the Holocaust happened, and when cousins who never chose to come over were murdered by Nazi soldiers, right, in
Okay.
the death
Mm-hmm.
camps,
Mm-hmm.
right? So even though, but the thing is, like, even the Jews who made it over, but as we did during the Great Migration, but again between 1880 and 1910, like most huge immigrations, we did not come because life was good in the old country. That was the
Mm-hmm.
time when there were state-sponsored pogroms, as in state-sponsored race riots or anti-Semitic riots against Jews.
Mm-hmm.
If you know the play Fiddler on the Roof, think of that terrible scene where they're having the wedding and then it's trashed by the soldiers. That's meant to be a pogrom. So that was happening all over Eastern Europe, especially in the Pale of Settlement, where my ancestors came from. It's now known as Ukraine and Russia. Um, so it wasn't like we left for good, um,
Mm-hmm.
for happy reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Certainly in the United States, wonderful opportunities awaited my ancestors. And historically speaking, many Jewish Americans have done quite well one generation after the next, right? My grandparents
Mm-hmm.
graduated high school and got civil service jobs. My parents graduated college, mostly state or city colleges. My generation, a bunch of us went Ivy League. So a lot of pressure for the next generation. I don't know what they do next after that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like kind of the immigrant dream to go from poverty to working class to middle class
Mm-hmm.
to moving on up. But I want to say that while acknowledging our privilege and our ascent, I believe it has been fraught with what some people call generational trauma related to
Mm-hmm.
anti-Semitism that propelled us to this country literally 100 years ago, or that murdered our cousins in Eastern Europe and Central Europe 60 years ago. So I don't I try not to think actively about the specter of anti-Semitism, though unfortunately, as all kinds of ugly racism and hates have increased lately, it is a thing that many of us minorities have more anxiety about. So I
Mm-hmm.
just want to name that. My wife, who's a school counselor and works in a summer camp, jokes that at her Jewish sleepaway camp, there's enough anti-anxiety medication given to the children. Not freely, of course, it's administered
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
script, but like it is maybe a
Well, that's
generation ago, it would be unusual. It is not unusual
mm-hmm.
for children and tweens and teens to have anti-anxiety medication in my community. And I believe that prevalence is probably seen in many other subsets of America, especially like immigrant groups, whether or not it is acknowledged freely. I mean, Jews are kind of unique in that many of our celebrities play with being, quote, neurotic or anxious Jews as an archetype. In the olden
Mm-hmm.
days,
Mm-hmm.
think Woody Allen. In the more recent world, think Adam Sandler or Ben
Mm-hmm.
Stiller. It's the guy that I play on stage who looks like me. He is very anxious, and one of the only early critiques that I didn't like hearing was like I was leaning too into this archetype, and I had to be careful about it. But I think part of the reason why it's an archetype is because that guy is a familiar character.
Okay. That was just about my next question. Like,
Yeah.
was it typical for Jewish people to actually be like that?
I mean, I think all stereotypes are informed by a certain amount of reality, or all archetypes come from composites of characters. So I would say there are some really ugly, unpleasant stereotypes of Jews that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
However, I enjoy good Jewish entertainers who lean into all kinds of neuroses, because I'm one of them. I'm not famous yet, but my comedy leans into deep insecurity, social misunderstanding, but like also existential anxiety. Like there's a theological anxiety that we'll talk about if I get to sing my song today, and it's the anxiety of a faithful person who prays, hoping, how do I put this? Hoping that their prayers are answered, right? So hoping for an outcome, a response, if you will. In the words of the song, "Send Me a Sign." That call for help, though, in desperation, comes after all of these experiences of pain and, yes, the accompanying heightened anxiety, right? When you have a loss, let's just name this, especially a loved one like a parent, right away when your world is upended, all of your expectations are unsettled. Naturally, you're going to have at least temporary anxiety being fear about the future, and as I define it. And so let's take the example of my fictional character on stage, Rabbi David. When we first meet him, we quickly come to learn that even though he's young, his parents have both died, and he's on his knees planting what we come to learn are daffodils in memory of his mother. And it's like a sweet metaphor at the end of the play. The daffodils are blooming and we have hope. Yes. But in that first scene, we also discover he is the new chaplain, and yet very apparently anxious and nervous. Can I do my job? Am I up to the task? And I think all of us can relate to that general anxiety of new jobs. Am I up to this job? Am I going to rise to the challenge or disappoint? I can tell you from experience as a chaplain, even when I was a so-called intern and therefore not paid for my time, but rather paying to be trained and give them hundreds of hours, you know how that goes. Yeah. I was still anxious at first. Like, was I going to say the right thing? I remember an early trainer, one of my first teachers, shout out to Rabbi David Glickman, who said that for many rookie chaplains, the biggest challenge is to overcome the anxiety of a high-stakes visit. Let me put it differently.
Okay.
In hospice, you don't know if you'll get more than one visit. You might be doing rounds in a facility with 20 beds, and because you're doing 2-hour shift, some visits, if they're not talking, might be 15 minutes to 30 minutes where you literally sit bedside and pray quietly, or I might strum my guitar, sing. If someone is communicative, I might chat with them for half an hour, but try not to go too long. If there's a loved one who is healthy with it and wants to talk with the patient in the room or out in the lobby, that's a chaplaincy visit. That might go an hour or even more. So you wouldn't like churn through lots and lots of visits. Follow? Like if you were working a full day, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, you might make it all the way down the hallway and back. But there was no expectation that you could motor through these visits, because that's not how the work goes. Yeah. It's different if you're a GNA and you're expected to change the linens in every room, you know.
Yeah, it's completely different. Yes.
Right. It's different kind of work. That said, you didn't know if you would be moving down that hallway and back, like when I was doing my training, I went once a week on Mondays, and I alternated between this facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and this one in Scotch Plains. Shout out to Center for Hope. Great organization. So I would be, I believe, among, God, it must have been 60 or 80 patients total. So there were a few who I would see more regularly over time.
Okay.
So those would be patients with, say, late stage Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where that disease moves rather slowly. And so someone could be in hospice care for a full 6 months, then be recertified and continue to be in hospice care. Others would arrive and die quickly. I had a congregant who I helped sort of informally to encourage him to pursue hospice care, and it was a great experience. He had a pretty gnarly infection that wasn't healing because of other related medical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And a doctor came and saw him and said, without meaning any comedy, like, okay, I can take care of this infection by removing your leg, and that procedure might also kill you because of this issue. And he was like, what? Forget it.
Was
and he
that
had like 8 or 9 days in hospice where he was like as lively as I am, funny. He made friends with everyone in the building as this infection raged, and then eventually it took him. But he just chose, like, that the so-called dramatic. He was also like mid-80s, so he felt like he'd lived a good life.
Okay.
And he decided he didn't want to run the risk of dying on the operating table anyhow.
Okay.
So his experience in hospice was rather rich. It actually inspired one of the fictional characters I added to my play, whose big song is called My Last Week on Earth, parentheses, Make a New Friend. And it's a little bit Frank Sinatra, Perry Como kind of swing of that era. And he talks about how he only has 1 week on Earth. What can he do? He wants to make some new friends.
Oh, wow.
What a lovely way to choose to live out your days. And I would say, coming back to our anxiety theme, the only way you can do that is with a total acceptance, as in almost anxiety-free, if that's possible, acceptance, a peace with the prognosis, because he was with it when he chose hospice care. And his anxiety, honestly, if he had any, was about his spouse. It was funny. It was a role reversal. What you often see is the sick or dying person dealing with some anxiety related to their prognosis or their death. And my role as chaplain is to help calm them. In this vignette I'm describing, which I try to bring to the stage a little bit, it was a loving couple. And the dying man was like, I'm good about dying. I'm worried about her.
Mm-hmm. So that happens in a real life too, like probably
Yeah.
So
sure, with all the gender combinations too. It happens to be the real life version, and the fictional version was a dying man and a loving wife as the soon to be widow. But I've seen all the permutations. And of course, as more gay couples age and die, we will see hospice scenes with man, woman couple, and every permutation in between, right? It's just love is love is love. But for anyone with their loved one, I would remind them that the goal, when we talk about a peaceful death, which I think a lot of us aspire for without knowing exactly what it means, I think part of it is to try to reach for a so-called anxiety-free or low anxiety passage from this world. That is difficult because there are some natural anxieties that come up related to going from here, a known, let's name this, a known plane, a familiar universe, to the next world, if there is one. And even right there, that initial question brings up anxiety for some people, right?
Yeah.
In my play, I use comedy to diffuse the anxiety about this whole big topic of death and dying. And comedy is a powerful tool to diffuse anxiety for me in all walks of my life.
Yeah, in real life.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
a funny guy. Um, I teach music in a K-4 school. Once in a while, when a kid is acting up, it can create an unexpectedly tense moment, and I am a cisgender hetero male. um I need to be very aware of what happens when I get angry, and that
Mm-hmm.
testosterone fueled response, and right, you don't want to see that face in front of little kids. It scares the bejesus out of them,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be triggering, right? We don't want to frighten our children. We want school to be a place of safety and reassurance. So if I start to get upset in a moment, I might name the feeling to try to diffuse it. And I might also model for my children calming strategies, literally to calm myself in front of them. I used to do this a lot more in, oh my God, if we're going to talk about anxiety in the workplace, in some more challenging schools. Right now, I have the blessing of working at an amazing school called Friends Community School in College Park, Maryland. It's a beautiful prep school, Quaker. We pray in silence. Oh, it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
There are still moments where kids are being age appropriate. They're challenging. They have interpersonal stuff, right? It's not peaceful, hippy dippy, groovy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a wonderful place to be, and it's generally quite peaceful and generally quite lovely. I can tell you, Pirette, I am so happy to have landed there, especially since I'm now 43. I'm trying to pursue some of my dreams, right? This play I'm promoting today, and also just trying to live a relatively healthy, relatively stress-free or lower stress life. My first several jobs in New York City following my graduate school education, I worked in some charter schools, some public schools in wonderful neighborhoods in New York City, with a lot of challenging problems in the community that the kids brought
Okay.
in with them. I worked for a few years in African-American neighborhoods, in Latino neighborhoods, and most recently in a poor white working class neighborhood outside of Baltimore, what I would call my Trumpy middle school kids.
Mm-hmm.
And in all of these different ethnic groups, separate from their race, they had coming in from the community just a lot of upset, a lot of tension. And it was, I can feel the
Anxiety.
cortisol creeping in as I
Mm-hmm.
describe these various places, because I have to focus. It's interesting because I've done some work with various counselors, one of whom, shout out to a wonderful psychologist named Dr. Jim Rutledge. So he was a former Army guy, and so he had a lot of hours working with PTSD guys, a lot of men, former soldiers who were required to go get help. And I came in willingly, but I had a work trauma. And as we talked, he said, actually, you have several. You just have your most recent one. I need to take a breath for a moment.
Okay.
It's really interesting to notice that even years after some of these traumas, speaking about them, even in this much detail, can trigger a trauma response that brings up my anxiety levels, various stress hormones. I'm a youngish man with some intense back pain related to an old injury from college. So when I have bad stress, sometimes it goes to the back. So some of that all happened live on camera just now.
Mm-hmm.
As I
And I like
cheerfully
how you
recounted.
were just able to go there like you were saying, like even you said in the classrooms, you're like, you show people that it's okay to do that. So other people, like the viewers who are watching now, and like it's okay to ask for that moment and that breathing moment. It's okay. They just like, because a lot of people
It's such a
don't
good
let that.
technique for self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And let me come back to my safer, pleasant place, because I still have some
Okay.
challenging kids there.
Mm-hmm.
I love to model in a tense moment. Let's say a kid is getting agitated. I'll say, it seems like you're feeling upset. That chair over there, the take a break chair, is now for you. Make your way over there, please. I'll let you know when you're ready to return. Now, I don't go there immediately, but that's a great, helping the child. What in a parenting situation, it would be called
Mm-hmm.
timeout. We call it take a break in a classroom situation. If something happens that's really beyond the pale, I stop everything in my lesson. I think that's a good technique for teachers, but I think it's also super helpful for all of you parents there. Because I think the anxious response, when you're like feeling what's going to happen next, so
Mm-hmm.
your kid is escalating. If you can be the one who's calmer, you're actually in the power position.
Mm-hmm.
And you're modeling how to control difficult emotions. So
Yes.
the kid is getting da 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 da, and you say, I'm going to take a deep breath right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling upset about what's happening right now in this space. In our house, we do not yell and throw things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Take a deep breath with me. And very similar script in a classroom setting. Kids, Johnny just got so upset that I needed to call for help after Johnny hurt Jimmy on the rug. We all need to reset, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Help me to reset, please. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. We're going to do some pizza breathing. This is my favorite technique. Hat tip to my wife, Alana, who taught me this. All right. Hold up. Pretend plate. You can try it if you want, Pirette. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Pretend pizza. And if you have a bunch of little kids, you can discuss what's on your pretend pizza. I have pepperoni. I like
Mm-hmm.
black olive on mine. What do you like on yours, Pirette?
I'm the one that likes the pineapples.
Okay, pineapple pizza, controversial, but hey, I'm not going to yuck your yum.
Pineapples and
All right.
Hawaiian.
Oh, Hawaiian, delicious. All
Mm-hmm.
right, whatever you like. That's what's fun about imaginary pizza. Ready, everyone? Bring it close. You're going to close your eyes if you're comfortable. Breathe in, smell the pizza. Breathe out, cool the pizza. Okay, that's the motion. Breathe in. Breathe out. Smell the pizza. Cool the pizza. 2 more times. Smell the pizza. Cool the pizza. Last time, super slow. Smell the pizza. Cool the pizza. Okay, good job, everybody. So
I just first I was like, "What are we doing?" And then I realized we're breathing. We're not smelling and cooling down a pizza. We're breathing. I was like, okay, so what are we gonna do? Are we gonna eat or something? And I was like, oh, we're actually breathing. I'm really breathing deep
ah,
and breathing out. That was so good. So that's a really really good thing for kids. And like you said,
wonderful. For
classroom.
kids of all ages, 0 to
Mhm.
99. We can all relate to
Yeah,
smelling a pizza.
classrooms. That's a perfect tool for classrooms. They don't
Oh
even
my God. In
understand.
this day and age, there's so much anxiety in the classrooms. I mean, I was laughing about my wife in her, upper middle class Jewish summer camp environment. But like, let's just name it. In America, there was that great podcast with Kai Wright that was called United States of Anxiety. He since
Oh,
then
wow.
has renamed it Notes from America, I guess because he didn't want to be totally limited to anxiety. But he
Mm-hmm.
started it noticing that like this escalating political rhetoric had so much fear and anxiety baked into it.
Yes.
Notably from the political right, like what's gonna happen if things change? And it's like, guess what, folks? That is the only constant in life. The only thing you can rely on is that things change.
Yeah.
To quote Avenue Q, funniest R-rated puppet musical ever. It's only for now. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one because in the moment it feels like this is forever. And of course tomorrow we remember that moment that felt like would be forever was yesterday. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
already starting to be the recent history.
Mm-hmm.
In our anxious moment, I guess the future feels like a scary monster barreling towards us. And it turns out that with practice, we can like accept it with more, I don't know, I want to say like open-heartedness, a sense of possibility and wonder. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do both with my play as a creator and producer and in my teaching role. And we can talk more about either of those because I know when we were getting set up before, Pirat, I named that in both of those roles, the role of, there's my camera again, the role of teacher, the role of chaplain, and the role of performer creator, there can be some high anxiety moments, and I've had to work through them.
Mm-hmm.
So which do you want to tackle?
I want to do like creative anxiety first.
Creative anxiety, let's go. What's your question?
Creative anxiety. So most of performers, they do have that anxiety before they do anything on a stage or they go on a stage. And some people can't even start being creative because they build up the anxiety, so they don't even get started. Did you have that before you started musical? Before you start
So
creating
your
it?
your question is spot on, Pirat. The first thing you mentioned is known colloquially as stage fright. But sometimes people call it more broadly performance anxiety. And that can be from
Performance
anything to
anxiety.
sports to theater. And there's also like a sexual aspect to it as well, if you think about the sex act as performative in some kind of way. But returning to the creative thing, when you think about what you're going to create as something that's not just a silly little thing for your own amusement,
Mm-hmm.
something frivolous in a doodle notebook,
Mm-hmm.
or a funny little rhyme that makes you
And
chuckle,
let me
right?
say, it's something
If
that
it's
you're
just,
planning to bring in front of a lot of people.
or even one.
Oh, okay.
I'm not even going to jump to a lot of people, though that jump can be paralyzing for many. By the way, last night, I've read and thought a lot about this topic as a creator and a songwriter, a performer, and I love memoirs of celebrities and singer-songwriters. So people as big as Bruce Springsteen, Barbara Streisand have famously wrestled with stage fright and performance anxiety of various types. Streisand is in the category of mega performer who could, quote, print money. She's so big and popular if she did live shows. But her stage fright to this day is so painful and difficult that the promise of spectacular sums of money is still not enough to make it worth it. Now, it should be noted that for people like Taylor Swift and any other star, whether it's a stadium show or an arena show or a club tour, a theater tour or a club tour or a coffee house tour, or in my case, doing house concerts and synagogue shows. I've done conferences. I mean, I've done big audiences and medium audiences, but like, no matter how big the audience is that you're dreaming of, that dream can also trigger all kinds of anxiety. right? Because it's the anxiety of, will one person like me and like what I
Mhm.
do and like what I came up with, what I invented, what I created, times that number of crowd, right? So if you're
Okay.
daring enough or audacious enough to say, someday I'm a rock star and my songs will fill a stadium. Okay, keep practicing your guitar, keep writing your songs. I say you have amazing nerve and amazing moxie. But if you're going to take your dream seriously, that's not 1,000 people. A stadium is 20,000 or more, right? That's a lot
Mhm.
of tickets. Do you have 20,000 people who love you enough to go to a stadium and sing your songs
Mhm.
and not ignore you and not dislike you, but love you? That is some daring, right? And the flip side of that idea is, what if one of them finds me out? What if they discover I'm not as good as they thought? What if they go from liking my music to thinking I'm a one-hit wonder? I mean, like, even for people who hit it big, there's something called the sophomore slump. There's so many people
Yeah.
who had big first albums and their second album was straight to the clearance bin. Never heard of
Mhm.
them again. They
Yeah.
still made it bigger than 1,000 other people who tried and never got their first hit.
Mhm.
But can you imagine the anxiety to make it that big and then say, I need a second album that sounds like the first, but not exactly the same, but not so different that the fans from the first will like it, but not abandon me, right?
Yeah.
Taylor Swift in this documentary we saw yesterday. It's called Miss Americana. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
Highly recommended. Taylor Swift, who is now, as we all know, the biggest live artist in the world. Guess what? As she was very anxious about the growing intensity of the glare. How much pressure? I mean, I've never had a Broadway hit. I hope and pray
Mhm.
that my musical makes it more than it has so far.
Mhm.
Who knows how big that gets. But I remember talking with in terms of creative anxiety. On the front end, it can be, who am I to create? Who wants to hear my thing? What if my song isn't beautiful enough? What if my lyrics, like, I lean heavily into comedy. What if my lyrics aren't clever enough? I mean, I have now anecdotal data from a couple of live workshop shows that my funny songs are funny because I get a big house laughing, right? So yay.
Okay. Mhm.
And in terms of meaningful ballads that are meant to evoke an emotional response, I've had a big room of people crying. My wife
Mhm.
says it's weird that I cheer for making people cry, but it's a
But
certain data
that's
point.
that's the goal of performance. You bring out emotions, and they have to be both type of any kind of emotions.
Correct. And a good performer, a singer, I mean, think about Taylor, to come back to her as a mega performer. Her first breakout hit was Tim McGraw, and it's kind of like a sweet bubblegum crush about loving a country artist. But she
Mhm.
very quickly wrote follow-up ballads that were like teenage heartbreak. And her superpower was tapping into that emotion of the tween and teen young woman, or more broadly, young person,
Mhm.
by writing authentically to her personal experience and being daring enough to share it. I mean, and that's, I think that is step one of the anxiety in creativity, right? You have this idea. Ira Glass, who is on the totally different part of the cultural spectrum, public radio podcast superstar, has this famous teaching about about your creative idea and the time and distance between your big idea and when you can actually do it.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like, all of you listeners, Google like Ira
I
Glass and
I
creative
have not
process.
seen it, but I can relate to it with my own things that I do. I don't do
Sure,
music
because you never
like
do
that.
it
But my
best
work
when you
between,
start.
yeah, when I
Right?
get
My
the
musical
idea.
is now 10 years in development, and like 6.5 of those I was still actively revising and writing. And honestly, if I get picked up commercially, I can expect more revision because that's part of the process.
Yes.
So there's anxiety about that, in that you have to step into a creative relationship and accept that someone might oh, can we name it Pick Over Every Word? But look, I just want to illustrate this for you folks at home. Like, here's a chart that I work from. This is something that I made, and it has edits on the chart. I mean, probably best practice would be for me to make a cleaner copy. But it's to say that, like, it's ever evolving, and you have to accept that. And I will breathe through it, because there's part of me that wishes it were all the way done. And so there's a certain anxiety about, like, what if I've taken too long? What if I've already had too many stumbles that my ship has sailed or the train has left? Why are these all transportation metaphors? I don't know. I guess it has to do with movement on this perceived journey, but here, I'll go with it for you. This is a songwriter. So if I've missed a train or a boat, then it's on me to make the journey one step at a time, and to try to cheerfully or with cautious optimism step forward. So like right now, I'm doing some appearances on podcasts, including this wonderful new show. And I'm also making some arrangements for what's going to happen in the new year. And let me be real here, as the producer, sometimes when my anxious, fearful self is a little bit taking over, when that voice, that fear voice, is louder, you're with me? I will ask myself questions like this. What if I book this Chicago tour, but I only lose money? What if my wife gets mad about me paying for a ticket and and it's not worth it?
Mm-hmm.
What if I do the show, but I don't sing well enough? What if I get 2 bookings, but not 3, and therefore I've kind of failed as an entrepreneur? What if I get $1,000, but I should be getting 2,000 and I'm getting my fee structure wrong? Like, that fear, anxiety voice can be so stifling for an aspiring producer, or even more broadly, like a person who wants to make a dream come true, or
Mm-hmm.
even just like, let's
Yes.
be less lofty, do a project, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We could be as small as a lemonade stand, which is like the classic metaphor for an entrepreneurial project. And if you start inside the kitchen fretting about your lemonade recipe and the weather outside and the foot traffic, guess what? You'll never sell a cup. You
Yeah.
won't even have a chance to lose money, because you won't even get started with the enterprise, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes a certain moxie or nerve. The Jews speaking Yiddish say chutzpah. Do you know that term? It's a good one. But you have to have a daring to set forward into the world and say, hey, world, buy my lemonade, right? When you're a creator, the lemonade you're selling is a project that no one has heard of. Like, I have this play called Life Review, the Hospice Musical. And here, this is a prettier visual. That's a lyric from the play. But as I spread the word to people hundreds of times, again and again and again, I need to do an elevator pitch, and I need to do my big reveal that I've done a musical about hospice. Guess what? That means for some people, they're like, ah, and I'm like, correct. And some people are like, ha, 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 ha. And I'm like, correct. And some people are like, for real? And I say, correct. Because I've learned that whatever their reaction, if I'm like cheerful and non-anxious about it, great. But if I go into it like, do you like my thing? Is my project okay? Like, if I pre-apologize, which is a certain way a lot of us, especially women, will like deflect their anxiety. They like apologize. To me, that's like a verbal kind of armor from anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I'm bothering you. How many times have we heard people who want to share an idea, and they kind of make themselves small even as they step forward,
Holding themselves back.
Yeah, I think so. So returning to the question of creative anxiety, whether you're just getting started, the anxious person hears that fear voice and lets it take over, and takes the moving pen and puts it down, or it amplifies the internal editor. You know, when I'm teaching songwriters, whether they be children or adults, I often remind people that the faster your pen or pencil moves, the less time your internal editor can catch up.
Okay.
And there's an exercise, I think a lot of therapists play with this too. It's sort of like a free association thing where you kind of get the pen moving, pencil, whatever you prefer, moving across the page in such a way that your feelings, words come pouring out. The ugly term verbal diarrhea, I don't like that. Let's call it a brook of ideas,
Mhm.
a stream. That's much prettier.
Mhm.
And the key is that you don't pre-edit. For aspiring songwriters or poets, you don't chase the elusive rhyme, because then
Mhm.
you end up with like stuff that's kind of trite and
Yep.
not accessing your heart. And then you come back later in the day, or maybe in a few days or a few weeks or a few months, to revisit that raw stuff and then see what's there, see what can be edited.
Mhm.
People are surprised to learn that when I write a song that I know eventually will be 2 or 3 verses, a bridge, and a chorus, I will often write 8 to 10 verses.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's a little
Can
bit
I?
like maple syrup. You got to boil it down. And this may not feel related to anxiety, but I'll tell you why. Because you have to accept in an open-hearted way that the things that are coming into your pencil, as in your creative ideas, never before heard in the history of man, of personkind, of humankind,
Mhm.
they might be good. They might be
Mhm.
funny. They might be worthwhile. They might be interesting. They might even be insightful or moving to other people. And they might not. But if
Yes.
you get hung up on the anxiety about whether it's worthwhile, whether it's good, whether it's funny, whether it's beautiful, your pen stops moving, and then the good ideas never hit.
Mhm.
I can tell you some of these songs that I've written, they often come to me like the nugget, as in the song title. They come
Mhm.
to me when I'm in a physical flow state. A lot of my best ideas happen when I'm swimming. I do a little bit of indoor and outdoor swimming, depending on the season. Indoor most of the year. In my younger years, I did a little more bicycling. Nowadays, some of my like silly kid songs that I've started to pay more attention to happen when I'm doing chores. And it's
Mhm.
tricky because if you're in the pool and you're all wet, you're going to mess up your iPhone if you run too fast and you're all wet. So like I would like sort of get a hook or song title and I just repeat it. And when I get to the locker room, dry off, Siri, take a note, song title, send me a sign.
Mhm.
Right. And then another night when the spirit moves me, I might revisit those song titles.
Mhm.
Creative people learn to pay attention to, if you're a poet or a songwriter, pay attention to phrases. I think photographers and all the other kinds of visual artists, even sculpture artists, pay attention to their visual world. If you look behind me, I have this really cool poster. I'm blocking it. There it is. Ooh.
Mhm.
And I
What does
love
it
it. It
say?
sort of looks like a Jenga, a little
Okay.
abstract.
Yeah.
And it's a Jewish wisdom quote. I want to share it with the people. It is not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either. It is not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, nor may you desist from the good work. And
Mhm.
the image, of course, is a rather imperfectly built structure. And
Okay.
you can see for that thing to stay up, people are going to need to watch it, maybe shore it up.
Mhm.
I like that because one of my biggest neurotic anxieties has been a sense that I need to do all of the things. What my adult self playfully calls aggressive helpfulness, to take care of all of the kids, when you're a teacher, to visit all the people in your chaplain. And very soon you learn you cannot, one, you can't parent the children in your classroom because they're not your children.
Mm-hmm.
You are in loco parentis. You are legally responsible for their safety while you care for them from 8 to 3 or whatever, but you're not their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a chaplain, you are in a certain sense a steward for the spiritual care of the person, but you're in no way responsible for a lifetime of spiritual distress.
Mm-hmm.
Or, for that matter, are you responsible for the theological cataclysm that was their cancer?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you imagine? And this is like a very big theme in my musical, and I think it is for a lot of faithful people. What happens when your prayer to be healthy, safe, and happy go unanswered?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard this one, P-Rat, happiness expert? People
I
who
never
believe
thought
and
about it
pray,
like
and they
this
don't get
way.
everything
I
they want when they
understand what
pray.
you're saying, but like it happens a lot of times, kind of. So I view it as adjustment. The way
Sure.
I go to it, it's adjustment of like what I was thinking that have to happen. There was actually something else that had to happen instead. Like I call it adjustment.
I think adjustment is a great term because it implies we don't have to like throw everything out. It's a little adjustment. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
take my singing and performing career. I am currently working as a music teacher, and I do a little bit of performing on the side, hopefully a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Like my professional expectations have been adjusted as I've pivoted from here to there to there. And kind of reorienting expectations and even like paying attention to my hopes and dreams and saying like, can I still chase those in some kind of way? If yes, how do I honor that? And if no, like, do I need to readjust? I was
Mm-hmm.
just watching, you're going to think this might be so random, but it's kind of how my mind goes sometimes. Earlier today, playing on my phone, some videos roll through. One of my areas of interest is rugby. When I was a younger man, I played rugby between the age of 20 and 30. Now, a lot of people meet me. They're like, how did you play rugby? Because I'm a small dude. I was a little bit more muscly in my younger years, and I was rather fearless. And sometimes, like, I see footage of, like, awesome rugby players, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. And part of me goes to wanting to be that 22-year-old, like, muscle-bound, great young player, not afraid of a guy 100 pounds heavier barreling at me. And I also remember the pain of being at the bottom of the pile, like, kind of stepped on
Yep.
and so forth. So, you know, it was exciting and also at times kind of scary to be in that age and stage. So, like,
But you know, Ben, like a lot of those times we're mentioning right now and talking like we have that anxiety, and that's what's important. We have that anxiety or fear, but we
yeah,
do it anyway.
right. So to be the young player who was a little bit undersized but still played rugby, I had to have this kind of brave spirit to overcome, like, that's a lot of big dudes, any of whom can tackle me when I have the ball. No, I'm going to pass it. So they go to someone else. But
Let them
again,
tackle
if
somebody
you
else.
are exactly someone else will get tackled, but you also accept stepping onto that particular game that it's high stakes physical contact in a different arena. I mentioned earlier in our conversation in the game, or let's just say life situation, that is chaplaincy and hospice or elder care. There's a certain kind of high stakes in terms of getting the conversation right. In my teaching job, there's a certain kind of high stakes, like you never want to say something awful to a kid because they'll remember it forever. I mean, I don't think about that at the front of mind, but like I've heard adults reference one brief interaction with a childhood music teacher. I'm not being hyperbolic here, especially musician friends, but a lot of non-musicians, like parents of current kids who are like, oh yeah, Ben, you seem nice. I had this music teacher, blah, 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 blah. And what is the story, Pirette? It makes me sad every time. It's, I was 7 and some music teacher told me not to sing because I had a bad
Oh,
voice. Or some teacher told me I was clumsy and I should be in the back row and not dance up front.
yep.
Or some like effed up gender stuff that reflected their
Mm-hmm.
heteronormative, like
Yeah.
homophobic nonsense. Like I was a boy and they said I shouldn't dance. Like
Mm-hmm.
whether he ended up gay, straight, anywhere on the like gender
Mm-hmm.
spectrum, it's so irrelevant. But like some adult 30 years ago told them, like, basically crush their joy
Mm-hmm. And
because
could
they
it
had
be even a
to with,
parent?
yeah, or the parent. And what is that about? It a lot of times it is the adult anxiety of like the way you, young person, present yourself, like triggers some nervousness about your future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm now going to own my own stuff here, right? Like when I see a rough and tumble kid, especially a boy, who takes it a little too far and hurts another kid,
Mm-hmm.
it brings up anxiety in me because I've worked with children who are older and are still hurting kids. And guess what? If they don't fix that pattern, they become criminal as adults. I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm
Yep.
not mincing words because when you are, I mean, in certain parts of the country, children are arrested in handcuffs from elementary schools as a way of the so-called aggressive over punitive
Yeah.
approach. I disagree with this emphatically, to be clear, but I am saying that like part of what happens in our school to prison pipeline is in many parts of the country, there is such what I would call an over punitive response to a range of challenging behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't
Yes.
want kids hurting one another in schools. However, I also believe that sometimes kids hurt one another because they haven't been taught how to diffuse their anger, how
Mm-hmm.
to have interpersonal relationships, and more difficult, how to have conflicts without using our fists.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the challenging school environment. So in those challenging school environments, I observed children, many of whom, for various reasons, had not, I'm going to put it very subtly,
Yeah.
had not mastered, or in some cases had not learned at all, the skills required to manage and regulate their own emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and how to express both desire and frustration, meaning like desire unmet, in a healthy and human way. Let me give a
Mm-hmm.
very tiny example to illustrate when this goes wrong. A child who lives with food insecurity, and God knows there's millions in our country, more every day. They may live with anxiety at home that when they're hungry, they don't have enough food and
Yeah.
drink to satisfy their growing little bodies.
Mm-hmm.
That's anxiety number one. If that's the case, chances are there's the evil twin financial insecurity and like poverty related anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and whatever the guardians, the grown-ups, arguing about money, worried about utilities. It's a lot of worry.
Yeah.
The kid starts to feel like the need to reduce their wants and needs so as to not upset the grown-ups. I'm not really hungry.
Mm-hmm.
These shoes don't hurt my feet. I can
Mm-hmm.
see perfectly. I don't need glasses.
Mm-hmm.
So there becomes a learned behavior of stifling like authentic needs, like hunger, like
Yep.
confusion. And finally, if the parents or the grown-ups, if in the community, at home and beyond, a lot of people are fighting verbally with words, with profanity, and unfortunately with fists, sticks, and guns,
Mm-hmm.
knives, guns. The kids start to follow that behavior. Even as I explain this, I want to do for the
Yeah.
second time in this interview, I'm feeling as I explain this a little bit of my heightened anxiety thinking about some of these kids, because I'll tell you, watching it in close proximity, it was frightening. Whether they were second graders who fought like bigger kids with fists, or bigger kids in middle school, where I personally felt frightened that it might go wrong and I could get hurt. Those are high anxiety situations. It's a reason that a lot of educators have rethought the profession, because unfortunately, in a lot of communities where mental health care has gone down as the needs have gone up, the educators are often tasked with teacher plus counselor plus peacemaker plus, plus.
Parent.
The only, stand-in parent for sure. Now, to have any hope, I'm not trying to be like doomsday, but I will say that part of the anxiety in those situations was the feeling of, the undertow is a metaphor that my wonderful father-in-law, Dr. Marvin Hoffman, often uses. He's an educator, now retired, but has trained teachers. So the undertow can be all of those forces that sort of pull your children in the classroom away. In a caring setting, it might be all of those outside forces that are taking your patient or the person you're visiting in the setting away from your care. And so a high anxiety practitioner, teacher, parent, helping person becomes fixated on what's out of the room.
Okay.
This is a very common stumbling block. I remember, it's funny, I've had a lot of conversations lately, P-Ret, with people who have interviewed me, and my unusual job path, what I call the zigzag career, one of the themes is being helpful and sort of sitting with those who need my help and kind of meeting them where they are. Now, for education, it's a different dynamic because there's a certain power structure and expectation, but with a nod to the last few moments, when you teach high needs kids who bring a ton of trauma to the teaching encounter, you have to be able to operate both as music teacher. Okay, kids, let's sing do, re, mi, re, do. And I see you're weeping. Let me know. Maybe later on we can check in. Okay. Why don't you go with your friend and wash your face? So that is like a move I learned not in my rookie year, but maybe in my second or third year, giving permission for a child who's weeping openly to go with a friend of their choice to the restroom to wash their face. At first, it confused me. It's like, are you trying to wipe away their sadness? No, it's giving them permission to step away in their moment of like distraught feelings, feel the feels, wash their face, kind of reset. It also tries to like reduce their embarrassment. The non-anxious teacher or non-anxious helper accepts the difficulty of the feelings in front of them and breathes with them. Here's another great metaphor. I'm throwing metaphors left and right. Catch them, Pierrette. In chaplaincy, we talked about going down into the basement.
Well, it's just metaphorically, right? You're not really actually going to basement.
I imagine there's some facilities where the worst rooms are in the basement. You get 10% off. Just kidding. But yeah, the metaphoric basement is where the dark stuff is, where the scary stuff is.
Okay.
So for some patients, again, respecting privacy, the dark stuff was a long marriage that was somewhat abusive or loveless or filled with regret or filled with cheating or filled with some sort of bad secret. For some, their basement was they never reconciled with the kid who moved away and Rabbi, I don't know if I'm ever going to talk with them again before my
Mm-hmm.
funeral. That's some dark stuff. Oh my
Yeah.
God. When a living person says, I don't know if this thing's going to happen before I die, that's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you don't see the specter of, the hooded death with the Grim Reaper, that's his name. Even if you're not imagining that, when you sit with a real life person who is living and with it enough to talk about their current mortality and their future death, that is heavy. That is a dark place to sit. For the rookie, that is not an easy conversation.
No.
For an experienced practitioner, I mean, I did 4 years of chaplaincy training, PRET. I know you're a fellow clinician, and so I imagine you also went through hundreds, if not thousands of hours with supervision.
Other people's emotions, so many other people's emotions.
Beautifully said. Right. The 1,000 of hours is not Ben Kintish going deep into his own psyche. I've done that in therapy and in some of there's what we call IPR, the interpersonal reflection that was part
Yeah.
of clinical pastoral education, where we would share with our very small cohort the deep feelings that came up in hospice. And
Mm-hmm.
for those of you listening who are interested in hospice care or chaplaincy, I encourage you to look up clinical pastoral education. It's an amazing program. And one of the things I loved about it was we took very seriously our own heart journey.
Mm-hmm.
Because as Shakespeare, one of my favorite playwrights, wrote, to thine own self be true. You need to really know your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not in order to bring it actively into the encounter, right? That's the mistake our eager
Mm-hmm.
beaver chaplain makes early in the play. He's like, I'm smart, I'm eager, I'm going to show you the stuff, I'm going to give you a sermon. And he falls on his face and he causes a terrible, painful situation
Mm-hmm.
because he thought it was all about him. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's about knowing ourselves so we can step into that basement, let go of our own story, acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
it. If the other person reminds us of our mom, our dad, ourselves, our dream, we say, oh, I see that. Let me put that on a shelf. Back to you.
Mm-hmm. Because now you mention it, you're going to other person's basement.
That's right. That's why all helping professionals, including all of you listening, ought to be in therapy. Because whether or not you want to deal with your own nonsense, your own history, your own parents, and I honestly believe that teachers, while not literally clinicians, ought to be grouped in as a quasi-clinician based on the amount of psychological drama that comes into their lives, because we care for all of these people. But whether or not you accept that prognosis, therapists, chaplains, clergy, certainly counselors, doctors, nurses, all these people should be in therapy because we spend all day
Mm-hmm.
receiving the trauma of others, the hurt of others, the pain of others. We don't necessarily think even of our nurses and doctors as receiving the pain of others. Maybe it's because we put them on a magical medical pedestal, right? They have the
Mm-hmm.
script, they have the medicine. But let's also remember that the doctors do those tough patient conversations. The doctors give the bad news about grandma, grandpa, or mom, dad, or spouse, or God forbid, child.
Yeah.
So if you're a doctor listening, you should be in therapy. And I'm not like here on behalf of is it like
Yeah.
at Talkspace or any of the apps, but it's because receiving all of that pain takes a real and sometimes profound toll on those who sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that metaphor of the basement
Mm-hmm.
can be a scary place,
Yeah.
right? The basement can be a scary place. And when you're good, I see you're nodding because I know you help a lot of people. When you have an encounter and someone says, Doc, or in my case, Rabbi, Cantor, whatever, I need to tell you something. You take a deep breath. And in your mind, you might be like buckling your seatbelt.
Yep.
Roller coaster metaphor may apply.
I relate completely right now.
And you don't know what they're going to say. I've had a child come to me and confide about the beginnings of their coming out process. I've had a parent confide that they, their husband just got an early MS diagnosis. Can you imagine your husband who's in great shape in his mid-30s getting the MS diagnosis? That's devastating. He won't be able to pick up his daughter by middle school. Like, that's horrible. But like, they might bring that to you in your role and you just tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me
And
more.
then you also have to go forward with your own life and next day without carrying that other person's basement with you. That's the hardest part of that kind of jobs, because
Yeah,
that follows you. If you
absolutely.
have to
So in
learn
addition,
not to let it follow you.
and I've got a couple of news you can use tips that I think are useful for anxiety in general, but certainly maybe we can name anxiety as like an array of challenging thoughts and feelings that can be related to other difficult feelings, right? So managing difficult feelings in general will be helpful for anxiety in specific.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, after I did those rounds in hospice care, I literally went bowling. In fact, I've often thought one of my working titles for a memoir is Bowling for Hospice. And the idea was, and I would rent a lane for 1 hour. And in the middle of the day, it was like retired guy special, like 10 or $12, crazy cheap. On the
Mm-hmm.
weekend, it's like $10 a game with shoes. But during the week, no one plays. So they would go super cheap.
Mm-hmm.
By yourself. For all of you bowlers out there, if you have no one waiting for you, you can bowl a game in like 10 or
I
15
didn't even
minutes.
think about that.
Yeah. So I could I could
Wow.
certainly bowl so aerobically. I would take off my outer shirt, just have my undershirt, start sweating. I could throw 3, 4. I think the most I ever did was 5 games in 1 hour, but by the end I was like nearly passed out. It was crazy.
Wow.
But why was that so good for resetting after hospice? Because it's a sensory overload in a bowling alley. I could throw $5 on the jukebox and get myself dancing to top 40 hits, shake my ass and laugh and clap and make the other old bowlers. I mean, I was all of 35 at the time, but the other guys are actually old, not just pretend old. And they would laugh at my silly dance moves. So laughter was good. Dancing was good. Music was good. Activity, the exercise was good. Something where I could like be playful, like, am I getting a better score? If I got a strike, I would cheer, and if I missed, I could cuss. And like that whole range of, I want to call it like exuberant emotion, to me felt like a great antidote to all of the heaviness and sometimes quiet despair that is hospice life, right? Again, hospice wasn't always sad and heartbreaking. In fact, a lot of people, as they learn about my musical, they're so surprised about the comedy in it. But that reflects a reality that a lot of people do laugh in hospital settings, in nursing homes, in hospice facilities, because life is funny.
Yeah. And you
Life
have
is
to,
funny.
mm-hmm, you have to find something that gets your anxiety. You want something that doesn't make the anxiety into depression, because there's only two ways in that situation, like hospice situation. Either your anxiety goes to depression or it goes to like we can call it comedy, but like
Or
something
release.
calm and relief and
Yeah.
everything like
And
this. There's
I
one
think
or the other.
totally. And, I guess I'm thinking a lot about teachers because it's back to school. So I know there's millions of Americans teachers and administrators, everyone who's involved with schools, going back to school this week, next, last. And so I'm thinking a lot about my fellow colleagues in that tough profession, but certainly anyone who's listening who is in a caring field. And even if you're not, you might be in an informal caring capacity. Think about all of us who care for aging parents or for children, even aging dogs and cats, heart to all my pet owners. Like, all of those caring relationships have an element of being in the moment of current fun and loving enjoyment, be it romantic, familial, whatever. And unfortunately, a certain amount of normal anxiety about the future, right? I'm 43. My parents are late 70s, early 80s. I can't keep track. They're old, getting older by the day as it happens. And I've got serious anxiety related to their health and safety living at home, right? That may be familiar to a whole mess of your viewers and listeners. I worry about my kid who's 12 and a half, a young woman in middle school. I try not to be like obsessed about it, but like they're normal amounts of anxiety and worry. But I try to come back to what's in front of me, what I can control. And that gets me to a healthier place.
Yeah. Well, let's start wrapping up a little bit as well, because we got a lot of information, a lot of like really, really good things out of it as well. Thank you, Benjamin. It was.
Oh, I appreciate it. If any of it is helpful, I'm glad. And if none of it's helpful, blame our host. She invited me.
No, I think we got like, there's so many helpful things, and I have to even like go back and even listen to myself again to get it all in. But let's go back to your musical for
yes,
one more.
I'd love to talk about it.
You want to do this song or no? You said something about the song before.
Song? I'd love to do a song. If you want a song, I got a song. All right. I'll do the big I Wish song. I kind of alluded to it in passing. You know, for all of you musical theater fans, you know that the I Wish song is the moment when our hero, our main character, declares for the world what they want. So Little Mermaid, part of their world is Ariel's I Wish song. For my musical, so for Fiddler on the Roof, If I Were a Rich Man, is his dream of escaping.
But I'm gonna put that in the bottom. I'm gonna put also the link. All the links are for the viewers. All the links are in the description as well. But I'm gonna put the link for your musical in the bottom here when you're singing. Okay.
Life Review musical.
That's
there we go.
That's the website, right?
Cool. So the song is Send Me a Sign. And I'll just set it up. The rabbi has inadvertently said something awful while visiting a patient and her dying son. And she casts him away. Rabbi David laments, what if I'm not up to this? What if I don't know what to say? If there was ever a time for divine intervention, God, it would be now. Can you hear me? Even when I've nothing to say, when nothing is going my way, God, are you near me? Will you be with me whenever I'm stuck in despair and all of the world is unfair? Please, God, see me. God, what if I can't say a word, or it comes out wrong? God, tell me answer. Do you like my song? Send me a sign from where you are. Are you near or far or in between? I have seen so many seekers. I am one too. It's time for you to send me a sign. Oh, I'm wondering about some big things. Can you tell me why? You made both my parents die and left me in pieces. I wanna find out. Tell me how not to feel so alone when rain soaks me to the bone. Answer with rainbows. Is there a lesson to learn from the pain all around? From the sound of tears in the dark? Send me a sign from where you are. Are you near or far or in between? I've seen so many seekers. I am one too. I've turned my heart to you. So please, God, send me a sign. Oh, send me a sign. Send me a sign.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank
Yes.
you. Yeah. Whew. A lot of information, a lot of emotions. That's the thing with all the episodes. There's so many emotions involved, emotions when talking about anxiety and all any of the other things as well, because you get to talk with peoples and you get to go like not just one thing we're talked about. You get to go to people's basements and you like the jobs, but you pretty much go to people's homes, but like talking in the interviews and listening people's interviews and podcasts that are, you get to go to people's homes and you get to have all those feelings.
Yeah, it's a
So that's
powerful thing to share. So thank you so
yeah.
much for the opportunity to share the song. Before I go into Shameless Pitchman, I'm curious, were there any lyrics there that resonated with you, Pirette?
Oh, the one that I was thinking about, I was thinking like for the listeners as well. Like so many people, they actually looking for the signs for all the things. Like they're looking for little signs and everyday things. Like should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And like even let's say I have this habit of having to hear putting like some my playlists on and putting in a shuffle and like saying that what's the next song is the song for related to this situation.
It's the song I need.
Yeah, the song I
The
need. And
universe
I
as
do that.
DJ.
Yeah, I do that.
That's fun. I
So
should try that sometime. I don't
mhm,
honestly. I think I could benefit from more shuffling. I tend to go into a certain direction with my list, but to address your bigger point, yes, lots of people. I think the reason why that song has been impactful for a lot of people, whether they identify themselves with the rabbi like a person of faith in crisis, right? There's a
mhm,
famous book by Harold Kushner on grief and faith called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's like a classic.
mhm,
And some people love it, some people find it very imperfect. But to cut to the chase, this was a rabbi, teacher, theologian, writer whose child died young of a terrible disease. So he was a
mhm,
man of great faith, devoted to God and his Jewish community. So by all objective measures, a good person. And this tragedy befell his family. So it inspired
mhm,
this book to wrestle with that that very notion. And I'm paraphrasing here. I encourage those of you who are interested to read the book and not rely on my paraphrase. But from what I remember reading that book and considering it, part of it is he engages with what he calls a pediatric Judaism, or maybe a pediatric theology. Pediatric meaning what they teach you when you're young, that is very heavy on the moralism and very heavy on the cause and effect. Mm-hmm. So if you don't look too deeply, it's very helpful for training little people to be nice to one another, right? Do as you're told, be cooperative, help your fellow classmates, take care of the earth. There's a lot of nice messages that are great. However, when we add the flip side, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. That's like some heavy moralist stuff, including like eternal damnation for like sins that kids may or may not have committed already, like especially if it includes homosexuality and so forth. Like, that's some heavy stuff to put on kids. What I would prefer is like to just teach children to be kind to one another, to help one another, and not because of future imagined or promised reward and punishment, but just because life is better when we are kind and loving.
I like that point of view. I
think worrying about everything you do in terms of a black and white moral code, or am I following this and that rule, to me is a recipe for a high anxiety way of life. And I try not to do that too much. But coming back to the people of faith, whether they're high anxiety or not, if you're praying and you want your prayers answered, we know that only in biblical times was it commonplace for prophets to hear the word of God, communicate it to people, and have people respond. And even in our biblical stories, many of those prophets were regarded as lunatics. We know that in this day and age, when people say, I can hear God or I can hear voices, where do they go? Not to the head of the congregation. They go to their local institution, right? So that kind of sign is generally shunned. We don't actually want to hear God talking with us. Maybe in drama, like in Fiddler on the Roof, and in my play, and that's kind of a hot tip to Fiddler on the Roof, he looks up to the ceiling and talks with God. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of us listening who pray regularly have a kind of a one-way conversation with God or our higher power, and in a sense praying. And I'm not meaning to mock prayer. I believe that prayer can be very powerful for people, including present company. Where I think it gets us into trouble is when we expect prayer to be answered due to the fact of our prayer, as opposed to prayer guiding us into a healthier place so that we might next do action towards the prayed for outcome. Mm-hmm. So there's a famous joke where there's, I'm going to tell it wrong, I'm sure. Famous joke where there's a terrible flood and the man is climbing up on his roof and he's very pious and he's praying and praying for God. God, send me help. And then a rowboat comes up and he says, hey, you want some help? And he says, no, I'm praying for help. And he says, all right, I'm going to go help someone else. And the water rises and the man prays and prays and prays. And next there's a canoeist and he says, do you want some help? And he says, no, I'm praying. And finally a helicopter comes down in the Coast Guard and there's a man dangling on a rope. And he says, take my hand, I can give you help. And he says, no, I'm waiting for God to send help. And he says, all right, I can't help you. And the man drowns. And he's at heaven at St. Peter's gate. And St. Peter, or fill in your metaphor, St. Peter says, why are you here? You didn't have to die. 3 different people came to save you. And the man says, I prayed for help. And St. Peter says, I sent 2 boats and I sent a helicopter. You didn't say yes to any of those. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, of course, what's funny about that is sometimes the help that we need is very much available to us, but we don't have the good sense to accept it. Mother Teresa, to be more serious and less jokey, Mother Teresa used to teach that her ministry was about putting her prayer into her hands. When I think about all of the theological models that guided my chaplaincy and maybe more broadly my work as a creator in the universe, or a human helping others, is to put my hopes and dreams, my prayers, into action through hands, the way I might help people or build projects, make music, whatever it is. There's a lot in the world that we can't control, some of which that is so scary as to cause ongoing anxiety, the death and dying being among the most famous. So we can't do much to forestall that. Some of us go to great lengths to try to look and stay feeling young, looking young. But if we also do a little bit of that heart work to feel a little bit healthier and a little bit less anxious about our aging, about our loved ones aging, about our mortality, about our loved ones' mortality, and aspiring to a healthy acceptance, that's going to be the healthiest place to encounter these really difficult moments. They are difficult moments in life. They are difficult moments in life that we go through, and we can get through them together.
Exactly. So there are solutions to all of them. Let me now, Benjamin, let's promote your musical a little bit.
Promote my musical. Fantastic.
Because, I wanted
Life
to,
Review, the hospice
how do
musical.
people where they can see it
Where can they see it? So start with the website. It's in the show notes, lifereviewmusical.com. I'm sure. Oh, it's on
our screen as well.
That's some high-tech stuff. Very nice. You'll find a great trailer video, professionally edited together with live footage from our last show that happened pre-COVID. You'll also find a whole mess. If you enjoyed hearing me talk today, there's like 10 other podcasts there, and there will be more deposited soon, so you can hear more interviews with me talking on the various themes of the musical. It's a rich project, and we engage with, in some of these other interviews, topics around hospice care, around grief, around aging parents, around care for caregivers, around the creative process itself. So any of those topics you want to learn more, you can look. We have a great history of the project. I didn't go into this today, but I want to do a shout out to my composers, Jason Spiewak, Michael Miller, with additional help from Andy Bosov and Miriam Cook. My script co-writer, Beth Broadway, yes, her real name, and all of my volunteer casts along the way. Thank you for your contributions. If you are intrigued, you can send a contact form on the website. We are now doing engagements for the next year and a half. I have a one-man version of the show that I've performed in Fringe Festival, in cabaret settings, where I do, and I can do it from this studio. I put black curtains behind me, and it looks really fabulous. And I perform with a digital piano for 6 songs and guitar live for 2. And it gives kind of a condensed version of the project. People have found that very meaningful, and that can be great as a fundraiser, as a performance for a cultural arts center, or even as a training for a clinical setting. So if you're involved at the hospital, a hospice, nursing home, and you think this is interesting, if it speaks to you, get in touch. I'd love to bring it to you in your next training or even benefit for your facility or organization. If you're involved with the theater world, let's be real, that is the big dream here, to go to stage with the full ensemble version. There's a full 2-hour and 15-minute play with an ensemble cast of 10, with a lot of dialogue and comedy, with 16 songs, fully written for piano and so forth, working on the orchestrations. But that is a project that I'd love to see on stage. So if you're listening today and you're involved in a theater, especially one that does new works, I'd love for you to get in touch. And I'd love to talk with you about how we can find a stage for this great project.
Amazing, because I didn't know that before. I didn't know that there's actually a traveling thing that you can take it anywhere. So
that's the thing. The one-man version travels easier than the ensemble version. But listen, with the right budget and the right advanced planning, we can make anything happen. So if you want to dream big with me, I'm ready for it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's exciting. Well, hopefully, I get to see it one day as well. That would be
Yeah.
cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, Benjamin. So we're gonna end the show now, but before we're gonna end, all my guests, I always ask them, what does happiness mean to you? Not that what happiness means to the world or what's the general idea of happiness, but just for you, Ben. What is happiness?
Singing a song that brings me joy, brings others joy. That's
Mm-hmm.
happiness.
Okay, and then it's also give me maybe one or three more of just a thing, other things and actions. Can be doesn't have to be action, but just a simple thing like coffee or chocolate or something like this that makes you also feel happy.
Oh, um, piano,
Okay.
gardening, walking my dog,
Mm-hmm. Cool.
coloring with watercolor or crayons,
Mm-hmm.
putting
So
together a puzzle.
mm-hmm. The reason why I'm taking it every time at the end, I ask that because the people can see they have their own, they don't have to look for happiness that everybody thinks is happiness. They have to know what their own happiness is. You know,
Sure.
like you were just saying, piano, you're walking your dog, that is your happiness,
Yes.
you know? And that's what most people, they have to understand. You have those happiness things already in your life.
Sure.
Well, everybody has already happiness in their life. They just have to pay more attention to it and actually label it what it is.
Yeah. Pay attention to it and give it space to thrive. I think that's super important. Those
Mm-hmm.
activities that you saw me smiling about, when I spend more time in a given day, whether at the piano or the jigsaw puzzle or out on the path walking my dog, like those are better days. And if it's a
Mm-hmm.
day that's difficult, I'm going to say to myself, oh, I should probably get to the piano or get walking with
Mm-hmm.
my dog.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you
And
so much for listening. Hope to hear from you guys.
yeah, and thank you for all the viewers. Definitely get in contact with Benjamin and get to see the musical. It sounds amazing. Hopefully, I get to see it as well. Thank you. Thank you for the viewers. Thank you, Ben. And have a great day and watch those other 9 episodes as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.